thinking about how you would feel if you were in Ukraine right now, that your life and your family was at risk of a potentially incredibly brutal war, and that somewhere, halfway around the world, there's some imbecile saying that that's fine.
When the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
Russian President Vladimir Putin went on an unhinged 1-hour rant on national television, which has basically alarmed anyone who is following this the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because it demonstrably shows a willingness by Putin to escalate this to the brink of war. And this video is probably going to offend every tanky sympathizer that I have, and guess what? I do not care, because it is clear here that Russia is the aggressor in this conflict, regardless of how we can criticize the US and NATO's brinkmanship, which has also been rather irresponsible. But let's be honest, the country that has 190,000 troops right now next to another country's border and is willing to invade it is Russia. It's not the US. It's not NATO. Get over this. So let's recap what Putin said in this speech. And unfortunately, I would have liked to see the whole speech, but I don't speak Russian. So I'll have to go by what I've read and by the comments that I've made from some friends and former colleagues in my previous jobs who were part of the respective Russia and Eastern Europe teams. So they have quite a bit of an expertise on these regions, and they all seem to agree that this was basically a complete distortion of history on Putin's part, and the language that he is using is probably the most aggressive that anyone has yet heard from Putin. So let's recap. So the main issue here is that Putin is going to recognize the separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states, and that is incredibly problematic because it violates the ceasefire agreement, the so-called Minsk Accords that were signed in 2015 following the 2014 crisis. So he's basically recognizing them as independent states, which follows the blueprint of what Russia has been doing in many other countries. Every time Russia wants to destabilize a country, it will follow this blueprint. It will arm and finance separatist movements. It will then declare them to be independent states. And, if shit hits the fan, like it did in Georgia in 2008, it'll invade. And I have no reason to not believe that Russia is very, very willing to invade Ukraine. I still wouldn't want to bet on whether a war is going to happen. I personally hope it doesn't. But yeah, I would say the odds after today's speech, I would say the odds definitely have risen. So I'm going to show you a bit of a map, because the worrying thing here is, not only is this a violation of a treaty that Russia signed, not only is it a violation of international law, but there is a concern because as it stands, so these are the two regions in Ukraine. I'm going to move the image a bit so you can see exactly where we're talking about, what part of Ukraine this is. And the existing regions of Donetsk and Luhansk aren't entirely controlled by Russian-backed separatists. So they control only a part of it. And there is concern that this is basically, the blank check for them to expand into the rest of those regions. Now, that would be clearly an act of war. The Ukrainian government has stated that any attempts to, move beyond the current ceasefire lines would be an act of war. So, we're still wondering whether there is some pretext that is going to be made to generate a conflict like this. Russia is accusing Ukraine of being aggressive, which is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. This is basically saying the country that is at the risk of being bombed and invaded is the one behaving aggressively. This is like basically Hitler on August 31st, 1939, claiming that Poland was going to invade Germany. That's the logic of this. And obviously it's bullshit. There have been already skirmishes, which have left a number of Ukrainian soldiers killed. So it's clear where the aggressive actions are coming from, and it's not the Ukrainian side. Anyway, let's look at what else he said. So, yeah. Some helpful analysis from Sam Green, professor at King's College London. Green on Twitter called Putin's televised address that preceded his formal recognition of two eastern Ukrainian territories unbelievably dark and aggressive. I've watched a lot of Putin speeches, and I don't think I've ever seen one quite like this, Green said. This is a speech designed not to make people happy, but to make them angry. From his Twitter, this whole speech is, as with his earlier essays, laying the groundwork for the wholesale occupation of Ukraine. That doesn't mean that that's where he's heading, but he's giving people a big wind-up. And I'm sure some of you may be old enough to remember the language that was being used by the US government around 2003, late 2002 to 2003 with respect to Iraq. Now, this was months of the Bush administration, suggesting that Iraq had links to Al-Qaeda, things like that, mentioning that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of this was a buildup. It wasn't the US, just one day to the next deciding to invade Iraq. They laid the groundwork for months. And this seems exactly like a repeat of that. And I'm going to show you the more damning evidence in a bit. So, so that is the... Look, this is from Putin's address. Those who took the path of violence, bloodshed, and lawlessness did not recognize and don't recognize any other solution to the Donbass problem besides the military. Therefore, I believe it is necessary to take a long overdue decision to immediately recognize the independence and sovereignty of the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. What else? Oh, this is a line that I hear from every fucking tanky on Twitter. This was a line that I heard from Kyle Kolinsky in a video that I criticized over his absolute dogshit take on this conflict. But here is the exact same thing being said by Putin himself. Ukraine has become a colony of puppets. Ukrainians squandered not only everything we gave them during the USSR, but even everything they inherited from the Russian Empire, even the work created by Catherine the Great. Someone should really slap Putin with a history book. But anyway, Putin told the nation that Ukraine is preparing military action against our country and that they will develop nuclear weapons. Are you fucking kidding me? Fucking kidding me. First and foremost, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in a deal that was signed with Russia. I believe it was 1996 or so. And part of that treaty said that Russia was going to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine as it stood at the time. And that did not stop Russia from taking over Crimea. And that clearly hasn't stopped it from recognizing the independence of these two breakaway states. So what Russia is basically showing is that no one should ever trust it on any treaty that it signs. But anyway, it is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous, to think that Ukraine is the one that is gearing for war. Absolutely ludicrous. If you genuinely believe this, I don't know how many hours you've listened to the Gray Zone and your brain is absolutely mushed. I don't know what to say. I honestly don't know what to say. The president pivoted a rant about NATO, saying that NATO is commanding Ukrainian troops and that the organization the actual aggressor. Okay, again, this is every single line you will ever hear from a tanky. Yeah. So it seems like the bulk of Putin, I guess this is like the first part of the speech, has been mostly a review of Ukraine and Russia's history. Putin said that Russia was robbed by the collapse of the Soviet Union and that Ukraine has never had traditions of its own statehood. Putin, collapse of historic Russia, the Soviet Union was a failure of its leaders and their policy. By the way, to all the tankies listening to this, Putin is not a fan of the Communist Party, of the former Soviet Communist Party. So, you have to reconcile. I'm sure you have already some Olympics level mental gymnastics to reconcile the fact that Putin is not a fan of communism in any way, not a fan of Marxist-Leninism in any way. He is only a fan of the Soviet Union in terms of its imperial power. That's it. Certainly, he is not a Marxist, and certainly a guy who is running, an oligarchical, hyper-capitalist, crony hyper-capitalist state does not have an ounce of Marxist-Leninist in him. But again, the mental gymnastics. I'm sure you're very well trained in these kind of mental gymnastics. Yeah, Ukraine was wholly and fully created by Russia, namely Bolshevik Communist Russia. So again, this is the line that I hear every single time you say, Ukraine is not a real country, therefore it deserves to be invaded. This is incredibly disrespectful to Ukraine as a nation and as a people, but they don't care. Of course they don't care. They've never cared. No tanky gives a damn about Ukraine. No tanky gives a damn about any country that is in the path of a Russian tank. That's a fact. They don't care. All they get is this like pseudo-sexual arousal at any time that Russia or China or any country that they worship does the exact same thing that they criticize the US for doing, or the West. That is really it. It is merely the aesthetics of leftism, the aesthetics of Marxism that motivates these imbeciles. But they have no concern whatsoever for any human being on this planet. That's a fact. They do not care about any country. And if you live in a country that is being threatened by Russia and China, these dipshits will not be on your side. They will never be on your side. Yeah. Putin, this is what they call decommunization. You want decommunization? That suits us fine. But don't stop halfway. We're ready to show Ukraine what real decommunization means for it. Yeah, like I said, I wish I spoke Russian. I would have wanted to pick some of the best parts of that speech. Maybe there's going to be a transcript released at some point. But this is very, very dangerous rhetoric. This is, the rhetoric that you've heard from anyone over the past 100 years who has wanted to invade another country or attack another country and wanted to find an excuse that gave them the legitimacy to do it. And you can say this about Germany when it wanted to annex Austria or Czechoslovakia or Poland. You can say this with the US before it was going to attack Iraq. It's the rhetoric you hear. They lay the groundwork for what eventually they plan on doing. Again, I am not 100% convinced that Russia is going to go to war. I'm not 100% convinced that they actually want to invade Ukraine. I definitely think the threat is credible. I definitely think they have the means to do it. And I definitely think that they will do it if they do not see that their foreign policy objectives are achieved without an invasion. But as it is, this recognition of those two breakaway states that are only able to break away thanks to Russian financial and military support is a massive escalation, way worse than any escalation that you can say that the US or NATO is doing. This is well beyond anything that the US has been doing. So again, you can fool yourselves into thinking that this is, a drop in a water of, the overwhelming problem of US and Western imperialism. If you want to fool yourselves into thinking that and ignore all the cases of imperialism, bullying, and aggression that happen among non-Western countries, then I really don't know why you consider yourself a leftist, and why the leftist value of universality in terms of non-aggression and non-intervention. I don't know why you've thrown that out the window just because you have some psychosexual desire to see Russia flex its muscles. That's really it. That is what motivates every tanky dipshit that I've ever seen. And it's not concern for people at all. And, the sad part of this is that you see this kind of Russian sympathies, not just from tankies, which again, I think, they're lost. They're lost to the left. They're not people that we can work with in any functional way. The problem is I see it from people who, otherwise have good takes on other issues, on economics, for example, who genuinely promote good leftist values on any other issue except when it comes to things like this, to condemning Russia using the same principles that one would condemn the US or Britain or France or any other Western country. And it's amazing because I've always thought that for some reason I don't know what it is, but there's something about the anti-war community. And I say this as someone who, started frequenting these forums, became engaged with these people ever since the war on terror days during, the Bush administration. I have always felt that the anti-war left finds it really fucking hard to maintain anything resembling a universal principle of non-intervention. They really seem to love it when a rival of the US or the West does the very same things that they foam at the mouth whenever the West does. And I've never understood why. I've never understood why why the anti-war left loses its fucking ability to reason, loses its ability to argue coherently and consistently, and always resorts to any, immediately some whataboutism. That's always what you hear. Well, Russia's doing this. Yeah, but what about, the US doing this? That has nothing to do with what's going on right now. Do you really think a Ukrainian who lives in a village next to the border that's going to be razed or bombed, do you think they give a fuck whatsoever about what the US did in 2001 or 1991? They don't. What matters is what's going on then and now. Who's being the aggressor at that moment? But seriously, I have seen this mentality for so many decades, and it's really not a surprise why a lot of the most miserable and imbecilic pundits on the left, who have gone sort of into this far right grift, tend to come or share a lot of these anti-left views, anti-war left views. Anyway, let's look at some of them. This is from Hassan. Yes, I just bought a Porsche, Hassan, which I wonder if his Porsche was parked next to the Russian border, he'd be this nonchalant about what Putin is doing. But let's listen to his amazing take on what's going on.
But you feeling bad about the Crimean annexation does not change the reality of the Crimean annexation being a completely justifiable fucking act by the Russian government, okay?
Any takeover of foreign territory is a violation of international law. Period. Period. You just can't do that. It's established. And these are countries who have signed those laws, okay? So they're bound by them.
So that's it. That's fine. And Hitler invaded countries based on Germanic ties at first? Yeah, dude. Talk to me when he's fucking throwing Ukrainians in a fucking... What are you talking about? Talk to me when he's throwing Ukrainians at a concentration camp, okay? Hitler wasn't fucking bad because he decided to invade Austria. He was bad because he was fucking killing Jews, okay? That was the problem. He wasn't like, oh yeah, we're gonna fucking annex territory with like Germanic people in it. That wasn't the main problem with Hitler, I think.
Jesus Christ, what a fucking idiot. What a fucking idiot. This is unbelievable. Yes, annexing Austria was a bad thing. Annexing the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia was a bad thing. These were all bad things. They would have been bad even if he didn't kill a single Jew, which I should add, at the time of the Austria annexation, he had already implemented a lot of very anti-Semitic policies at home. And by the time the World War II started, a lot of Jews had been killed in Germany. So don't wait until this is such a fallacy. He's such a fucking idiot, really, just a fucking idiot to argue this. Like, this is basically like, the people I hate are only bad until they commit like the worst possible genocide. Until they do that, they're not that bad. Meanwhile, I'm gonna call everyone who I dislike an evil, Bush is a genocidal maniac. But wait, did he start concentration camps? It's the same argument. It's the same argument. By his logic, Bush was not so bad. Unbelievable. What else? I saw this tweet from Ben Burgess. Usually I agree with what he says, but here's like really, yeah. Putin, the right-wing gangster capitalist oligarchy he presides over, and Russia's regional mini-imperialism are all bad. Everyone should be clear about that. But for fuck's sake, opposing U.S. imperialism should be the overwhelming priority for American leftists, and that should go without saying. This is a false dichotomy. It's basically just saying like, well, you should shut up about it and you should only complain about U.S. Imperialism if you are a U.S. leftist. And this assumes, as I responded to him, that there's some imaginary limited bandwidth in which we can criticize bad things. Why should we only criticize one country's imperialism if right now the worst case, at this moment, the worst case of imperialism is happening between Russia and Ukraine? So why shouldn't we criticize that? Well, I'm saying we, obviously by his standard as a non-American, I can criticize it, but I still find it weird that he thinks that any other American shouldn't do that. Let's move on. Lee Camp, podcaster. It's no secret that the US has funded and armed literal Nazi forces in Ukraine. Images have now come out of a meeting between Nazi-linked Ukrainian National Guard and US allied British forces, but our mainstream media has no interest in reporting reality, only government propaganda. So this is also one of the big tanky talking points, that, oh my God, Ukraine is controlled by Nazi militias. Are these really the people we want to ally with? Ironically, these are the same people who are fine with allying with neo-Nazi Canadian truckers. Those are clearly okay. But when it comes to allying with neo-Nazi militias, that is bad. Again, very selective interpretation of these non-existent principles that these leftists supposedly have. Now, this idea that like Ukraine is controlled by the far right. Yeah, it's true that there are some far right militias like the Azov Battalion. They have very, very visible neo-Nazi insignia. And yeah, they have, positions on the National Guard. I'm a bit mixed about this. I find it very uneasy to ally with neo-Nazi militias. On the other hand, if Mexico was being invaded by the US and I had neo-Nazi Mexicans who were willing to take up arms against the invader, I may be okay with that. Okay, so it's not uncommon for opposing sides to temporarily fight together against an external opponent. And I should remind people that leftists have done this as well. The best example of this, and I'm making this point for the tankies listening, remember how the Mao's communist armies basically stopped fighting the Chinese government, the Western-supported Chinese government during World War II, so that they can both fight against the Japanese. So there is a case to be made that all sides have done this when it suits them. And, if you feel that the external enemy is a bigger threat, there is a case to be made that, let's temporarily fight them rather than ourselves, and we can arrange things after the external threat is done for. But anyway, the real problem with this argument isn't so much whether or not the neo-Nazi militias should have any sort of place in the National Guard or elsewhere. The idea is whether Russia also doesn't do this. And the answer is yes, it categorically does. And this is a very good tweet, which shows the links to various Russian organizations to the far right. And the best case of this is the Wagner Group. Now, if you haven't heard about the Wagner Group, it's a very shady black ops organization led by a guy whose nom de guerre is Wagner. I don't know what his real name is, but it's basically a group that has been operating in many countries around the world, including Africa, the Middle East, etc. It's basically a black ops group. Exactly, there's no better definition of this than a black ops group that is obviously getting orders from Moscow. It is a tool of the Russian government to basically create chaos and mayhem abroad, like every other black ops group, like the same black ops groups that the US does or has funded in many countries in the past. This is the exact same thing. And this is Mr. Wagner, who, aside from having probably the worst case of constipation you can possibly imagine, his real name is Dmitry Utkin, has SS tattoos on his neck and has a German, a Nazi eagle right there. Totally not neo-Nazi group there. And this guy receives orders from Moscow. So you're going to tell me that Russia also doesn't have far-right groups tied to the government? You gotta be fucking kidding me. Here's another picture of Task Force Rusisch. What sign are they doing here? I've never seen that sign before. Yeah. So again, is Ukraine uniquely neo-Nazi, especially considering Russia's own neo-Nazi links? The fact that Putin has supported far-right movements in many parts of the world as well. The fact that he has also supported, like far-right movements within his own country, like, for example, Russia's hooligans, things like that. Come on, give me a break. I mean, Russia is a far-right country. It is. The Putin government is a far-right country. Anyone thinking that Putin is like some kind of leftist is seriously demented. Seriously fucking demented. Yeah. Anyway, this take was also pushed by the Gravel Institute, and I really hate talking bad about the Gravel Institute because they do a lot of really good work. They do some very good videos. In fact, I've probably not disagreed with them at all until this moment. And unfortunately, they deleted the tweet, but it was also along the lines of kind of the same thing as this idiot, not Ben. The Lee Camp fella. It was basically along the same lines as, yeah, Russian aggression bad, but let's not whitewash. That was the word that they used in that tweet. Let's not whitewash the fact that there are so many, Ukrainian neo-Nazis in the National Guard and government, whatever. So again, I quoted this tweet because I'm too lazy to do my own tweets. And they reply, obviously the pro-Russian separatists are also bad. No one is saying they're not. The point is that we should not be getting involved, not that either side is good, which forces rarely are in geopolitics anyway. The problem is, it's not that these are the pro-Russian separatists. The problem is, like, the Wagner Group is an agent of the Russian government. So, those aren't the pro-Russian separatists. They are organized militia and black ops groups that are doing the Russian government's work in many parts of the world. Do you deny this? And they did not reply, and they deleted the tweet. Again, a rare L in what is mostly a lot of W's for the Gravel Institute, and yeah, this is really what I mean. There were so many tweets like this weekend. I think this was like Tanky on Twitter weekend. just absolute deranged takes by supposed leftists. And again, I'm really not worried about the tankies, because I'll say it again. I think they're lost. I think that they should not be people that we should, as leftists, be a part of in anything. They're gone. They're right wingers. They're red fascists, basically. They have no space on the left. But what worries me is that these similar takes have been promoted by otherwise intelligent people, and leftists who otherwise, are not tankies, or Marxist-Leninists, who might have good takes on economics and other issues. But when it comes to the anti-war issue, they completely lose their sense of reasoning. And it's amazing. I really would like to get to the bottom of what is it about the anti-war discourse, the anti-war rhetoric, that just turns people's brains into mush. And I say this as someone who absolutely hates US and Western imperialism. I think it is the most malignant force in the world, aside from capitalism, which the two are pretty much bedfellows. You could not spread capitalism if there wasn't US and Western imperialism promoting it as well. But this should not blind people to the notion that there are other countries that may be ostensibly opposed to the US, but represent no leftist values whatsoever. Russia is not a country that any sensible leftist should support in any way. This is a fucking far-right government that presides over a kleptocratic, oligarchical, hyper-capitalist economy. It's a freaking petrostate that basically just arms separatists among the neighbors that it is that they aren't subservient to Russia. Any neighbor that they have, or a country near them that isn't subservient to the Kremlin, will be fucked up by Russia. And I really find it hard to think that leftists are comfortable with that. So if you are that kind of leftist, seriously, just spend a weekend outside of this whole discussion and debate. Spend a weekend just thinking about how you would feel if you were in Ukraine right now. That your life and your family was at risk of a potentially incredibly brutal war. And that somewhere, halfway around the world, there's some imbecile saying that that's fine. Think about that. Just think about that. Because it's really, really disgusting to imagine leftists who have such little concern for other countries. And who use these same arguments that you now hear from Putin. That, well, they're a puppet of the West, and then they deserve to be invaded. That is fucking bullshit. That is fucking bullshit. Every country has the right to sovereignty, has the right to peace, has the right to safety. They have the right to make whatever security arrangements they feel are necessary. And I think if your fucking big, powerful neighbor just stole the Crimea and is funding separatists, then you might actually want to join NATO. So, there you go. I look forward to the tankies and tanky sympathizers in the comments. But yeah, that's my take on this issue. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, please share. Most importantly, please subscribe. And I will see you next time.